In the year 1881, in the beautiful Italian city of Florence, a boy named Guccio Gucci was born. Florence was famous throughout Europe for its art, architecture, craftsmanship, and talent artists. Everywhere Guccio looked, people were creating things with their hands. Leather workers shaped hides into useful objects. Shoemakers carefully constructed shoes. Craftsmen repaired luggage, bags, belts, and other goods. For Guccio, these things were part of everyday life. He could not possibly have known that one day his family name would become famous across the world. There was no Gucci empire, there was no luxurious Gucci stores, there were no famous fashion shows. There was only a young boy growing up in Florence and watching the world around him. As he grew older, Guccio became increasingly curious about how people lived. He noticed that some products were treated differently from others. Two objects might serve the same purpose, but one would be considered ordinary while other would be considered special. Why? Guccio began to understand that quality mattered, the material mattered, the way something was made mattered, and perhaps most important, the story behind a product mattered. Those observations stayed with him. Guccio was not yet an entrepreneur, but he was already learning to think like one. He was learning to look at ordinary things and ask usual questions. The habits would eventually change his life. As a young man, Guccio wanted to see the world beyond Italy. Florence was his home, but he wanted to experience. He wanted to discover how people in other countries lived. He wanted to see different businesses. He wanted to understand what wealthy people valued. Eventually, he traveled to London. For Guccio, London was a completely different world. The city was enormous compared with the Florence he knew. Its streets were crowded with people from many countries. Hotels were filled with travelers. Businesses were competing for customers. And among all these people were wealthy travelers carrying expensive luggage. Guccio noticed them carefully. He saw trunks, suitcases, bags, and travel accessories that were very different from the product he had seen in Florence. But he did not simply admire them, he studied them. What materials were being used? Why did people prefer certain products? Why did some customers care so much about appearance? What made an ordinary object feel luxurious? These questions occupied Guccio's mind. He was beginning to understand something important. A successful business begins by understanding what people value. Gucci did not know that these observations would eventually help him build a famous company. At that moment, he was simply learning, but learning was preparing him for his future. Guccio eventually worked at the prestigious Savory Hotel in London. This was one of the most important experiences of the young life. The Savory attracted wealthy and influential guests from around the world. Every day, Guccio saw travelers arriving with expensive luggage. He saw how carefully their belongings were handled. He noticed how customers expected excellent services. He saw that wealthy travelers were simply interested in buying something that worked. They wanted quality, they wanted elegance, reliability, and they wanted an experience. Gucci began to understand that luxury was not just an expensive price, it was about feeling surrounding a product. Imagine a traveler arriving at a grand hotel with a beautifully made suitcase. The suitcase was useful, but it also represented something. It represented travel, wealth, taste, and a particular lifestyle. Gucci understood that objects could communicate ideas. This realization would later become extremely important. While working at the hotel, he was learning about customers without realizing that he was receiving an education in business. He watched, he listened, he remembered, and slowly an idea began forming in his mind. Perhaps one day he could create something of his own. But he was no longer the same young man who had left. London had changed his perspective. He now understood international luxury. He had seen wealthy customers. He had observed how important service and presentation could be. But he had also remembered something from Florence. Italy had incredible craftsmen. Florence had a long tradition of leatherworking and handmade goods. Guccio began imagining a combination. What if Italian craftsmen could be combined with the elegance and sophistication of he had witnessed in London? What if he would create leather goods that were not only practical and beautiful? What if travelers from around the world wanted to buy products made in Florence? The idea was exciting, but having an idea was not enough. Guccio needed to act. He would need money, he would need workers, customers, and patience. And most importantly, he would need courage. The company Guccio established his own business in Florence. The company initially focused on leather goods and luggages. It was small. There was nothing about it looked like a future global fashion empire. But Guccio understood something that many people forget. Every large company begins as small, something small. The early Gucci business was far from the glamorous company people know today. There were no international advertisements, no celebrity ambassadors, no huge fashion show. Guccio had to earn his reputation. He focused on making products carefully. Every piece mattered, every customer mattered. If someone entered the shop and bought a product, Guccio wanted that person to leave satisfied. He understood that reputation spread slowly. One customer could tell another. A traveler could recommend a product to a friend. A family could return to the same shop years later because they trusted the quality. Gucci understood that business could not simply tell people that it was excellent, it had to prove it. So he focused on craftsmanship, he focused on details, service, and he focused on creating products that customers could trust. This required patience. There were undoubtedly ordinary days when nothing dramatic happened. A customer entered, a product was sold, an artisan worked at the bench, another customer asked a question, then the shop closed, and the next day the same process began again. That may not sound exciting, but successful businesses are often built through exactly these ordinary days. As Guccio's business grew, his family became increasingly involved. His sons, including Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo, would eventually play important roles in the company's development. This transformed Gucci into a true family enterprise. The sons brought their own ideas and ambitions. One of the most important was Aldo Gucci. Aldo believed that business could become much larger. He did not want Gucci to remain only a successful shop in Florence. He believed that the world could become its market. This was a bold idea at that time. International expansion was far more difficult than it is today. There was no social media, there were no instant online advertisements. Communication was slower, international travel was more complicated. Opening a store in another country required significant planning, but Aldo believed in the potential of the family name. The company now had something important, a strong foundation and a vision of expansion. Guccio had built the foundation, his family would help build the future. Then came a period of enormous uncertainty. The years surrounding the Second World War created difficulties for businesses across Europe. Materials became harder to obtain, transportation was affected, economic conditions were unstable. For Gucci, the shortage of leather was particularly serious. Leather was central to the company's product. If the company could not obtain enough leather, what would it do? A business facing a problem has two choices: it can stop or it can adapt. Gucci chose to adapt. The company began experimenting with alternative materials. This was not simply a creative exercise, it was necessary. The company had to continue serving customers despite difficult circumstances. This period demonstrated an important principle. A successful business is not one that never faces problem. It is the one that learns how to respond to problems. Gucci could not control the world, but it could control its response, and that response would eventually create one of the company's most recognizable designs. Among the material used by Gucci during this period was bamboo. Gucci artisans developed ways to shape bamboos into elegant handbag handles. At first, this was partly a particular response to material shortage, but customers began noticing the usual design. The bamboo handle gave the bag a distinct appearance. It looked different, it felt different, and it became associated with Gucci. This was an extraordinary example of how a limitation could become an opportunity. Gucci's company had faced a shortage. Instead of allowing the shortage to destroy creativity, the company experimented. The result became part of Gucci's identity. This lesson applies to most of every of area of life. Sometimes you don't have in everything you want. You may not have enough money. You may not have enough resources, equipments. You may not have the perfect circumstances, but that does not mean you cannot create something valuable. Sometimes limitations forces people to become more creative. Gucci learned that lesson early. As Gucci became more successful, the family realized the quality alone was not enough. They needed a recognizable identity. Customers needed to see a product and know where it came from. The company began developing distinctive designs elements. The horse bit became an important Gucci motif. The green red green strip became another recognizable element. These details might seem small, but small details can have enormous importance in branding. Imagining seeing a product from far away, you may not know exactly what it is, but if you recognize a familiar pattern or design, you may immediately think of the company. This is the power of a brand. A product can be copied, but a strong identity is much harder to copy. Gucci was slowly moving from being a company that sold leather goods to being a company with a recognizable personality. That personality would eventually become one of its greatest assets. Although Gucci believed that the family business could succeed outside Italy, he understood that the reputation of Italian craftsmanship could attract international customers. The company had already developed products with a distinctive identity. Now it needed a larger audience. The opportunity came in the United States. In 1953, Gucci opened a store in New York City. This was a major moment. Think about what it meant. A company that had started in Florence was now operating in one of the world's most important cities. The journey from Florence to New York represented more than geographical expansion. It represented a change in ambition. Gucci was no longer thinking only about Italian customers, it was thinking internationally. New York introduced Gucci to a huge audience of American consumers. The company's Italian heritage became an important part of its appeal. The world was beginning to notice the Gucci name. As Gucci expanded internationally, its reputation grew. The company became known for leather goods, shoes, handbags, luggages, and accessories. Customers began associating the name with Italian craftsmanship and luxury. The brand attracted wealthy and influential customers. Its products began appearing in fashionable circles, but behind the fame was still the same basic principle Gucci had learned years earlier. Understand the customer, create something valuable, make it carefully, build trust. The difference was that Gucci was now doing this on a much larger scale. The small shop in Florence had become part of an international business, but expansion created new responsibilities. The more successful Gucci became, the more carefully it had to protect its reputation. A luxury brand could not simply produce anything. Customers expected something special. The company had to protect the feeling of an exclusivity that would become an ongoing challenge. A major reason for Gucci's success was that its product represented more than practical objects. Consider a handbag. Its basic purpose is simple. It carries personal belongings, but a luxury handbag can communicate much more. It can communicate style, taste, status. It can become part of a person's identity. Gucci understood the emotional side of luxury. This was something Gucci had begun learning at a Savoy hotel decades earlier. He had watched wealthy travelers. He had noticed that they cared about more than fact function. They cared about appearance and experience. The company learned how to transform that understanding into products. This was one reason the Gucci name became so powerful. People were not simply purchasing an object, they were purchasing a connection to a particular idea of Italian luxury. This is the difference between selling a product and building a brand. The Gucci family had achieved something remarkable, but as the company became more valuable, family relationship became more complicated. Different members had different opinions. Some wanted expansion, others wanted greater control, some wanted to preserve traditions, others wanted change. These disagreements created tension. A family business can be difficult because business decisions are rarely just business decisions. A disagreement in the office can affect a family dinner. A decision about ownership can affect personal relationships. The larger the company became, the more important these questions became. This is one of the less glamorous parts of Gucci's story. People often look at successful companies and seize the money. fashion, and beautiful products. They do not always see the difficult conversations happening behind the scenes. Gucci's history shows that success does not eliminate problems, sometimes it creates new ones. In 1953, Guccio Gucci died. He had created something that was already successful, but the company would continue growing longer after his death. There is something powerful about that. A founder begins with an idea, but eventually the founder has to leave the company. If the business disappears with the founder, then the founder may have created a personal success rather than a lasting institution. Guccio's company continued. His sons continued developing the brand. The business expanded, its products became more recognizable, its international presence increased. Guccio could not see everything that would happen. He could not see every future store. He could not see every famous customer. He could not see every design, but he had created the foundation. He had planted a tree whose branches would continue growing. During the decades that followed, Gucci became increasingly famous. Its products were associated with luxury fashion. The name appearance in wealthy social circles, the company expanded its range of products. The brand became recognizable in different countries, but with fame came a new problem. People expected Gucci to remain exciting. Fashion does not stand still. A design that is popular today may become outdated tomorrow. A company that was successful in one generation cannot simply repeat the same formula forever, it has to evolve. Gucci needed to protect its heritage while continuing to innovate. This challenge is common among famous companies. Their history is an advantage, but it can also become a limitation if they refuse to change. Gucci would eventually face the challenge very seriously. But later 20th century Gucci experienced periods of difficulty. The brand needed a fresh direction. Competition was increasing, fashion was changing, consumers' expectations were changing. The company had a famous name, but a famous name alone could not guarantee future success. Gucci needed creativity, new ideas. It needed to reconnect with the customers. Most importantly, it needed to find a way to make its heritage relevant to a new generation. This was a dangerous moment. If the company changed too much, it could lose its identity. If it changed too little, it could become outdated. The change and the challenge was to find a balance. A successful brand must know what should never be forgotten and what must be changed. Gucci's future would depend on finding the balance. During 1990s, designer Tom Ford became a major creative force at Gucci. His approach gave the brand a new modern image. The company became more daring. Its fashion identity became stronger. Gucci once again attracted enormous attention. A younger generation became interested in the brand. The transformation demonstrated something important. Gucci did not have to abandon its history in order to become modern. Instead, it could take elements from its heritage and present them in a new way. The company's history remained part of its identity, but the way the history was presented changed. This was a powerful lesson for any business. Tradition gives you roots, innovation gives you growth. Guccio had built the original foundation, later generations had the responsibility of keeping the foundation alive. When you look at Gucci's entire history, the journey becomes extraordinary. It started with Guccio Gucci in Florence, then came his experience in London. He observed wealthy travelers, he learned about luxury and customer services, he returned to Italy. He opened a small business in 1921. He focused on leather goods. His family joined him. The company faced difficult economic conditions. It experimented with new materials. Bamboo became part of design history. Distinctive motifs helped establish a recognizable identity. The family expanded internationally. A store opened in New York. The Gucci name became increasingly famous. Later generations faced challenges. The company reinvented itself and the brand continued. This did not happen in a single year. It happened through decades of work. There were thousands of ordinary days behind the extraordinary result. This is something people often forget when looking at a successful companies. They see the final result, they don't see the years that came before it.